What is going on? I want to welcome you from half court for today. I'm Sean Murphy, joined by Marquette's movement shooter and the best baller in the neighborhood, Troy Sergey. Troy, what's going on, man? It's good to see you. How are you doing today? You got to go see James Harden this weekend. Tell me a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, I'm doing well, Sean. Yesterday had an opportunity to go to the Clippers and Pacers game here in Indy, and yeah, saw a great performance from both Tyrese Halliburton, especially in the third quarter, and James Harden had a good performance. That was my first time ever seeing him play live in person, so that was a treat for me. But yeah, it was a fun experience. I know James Harden definitely made I think three threes right there, right off the bat in the first quarter. He was off for a hot start, and then was able to get more touches throughout the game and finish with 31. But the Clippers really were never in the game, Sean. The
No.
Pacers really just had the all around better, deeper roster, and yeah, the Clippers didn't really play a super deep rotation anyways. So it was still a good experience. But yeah, I mean, I find myself actually rooting against the Pacers now that the Pistons are so close in playoff contention.
I was gonna say it's probably got to be a pretty weird spot for you now because, like, for those that aren't familiar with the podcast or haven't been listening, or are new listeners, Troy is in Indianapolis, and for the first little bit of living there, you're kind of able to root for them without any repercussions because the Pistons were rebuilding, and so for like a fun second team to have, the Pacers being right down the road, cheap tickets, it's a nice little perk. But now, I mean, Troy, we're like we keep talking about this. There is a very realistic chance that the Detroit Pistons face the Indiana Pacers in the first round of the playoffs. I mean, Detroit's only a game and a half behind Milwaukee, who just lost Bobby Portis for 25 games due to a drug and wellness suspension. So there's a very realistic chance those teams could be on a collision course. How do you cope with that?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's not as hard as you think. I still
Right, it's a
believe
pretty easy
in red,
decision.
white, and
Go
blue.
Pistons, but
Yeah, right, right. But yeah, you're right. I've grown to really like this team and how this roster is constructed. I was really a big fan when they brought in Pascal Siakam. I really liked how they kept Miles Turner at the deadline, and it's been fun. Really, my first year living here was Tyrese's All Star. Performance, and then last year was his All-Star starting,
yep.
performance, and then this year, of course, we know he hasn't been as great on the offensive end, but I've watched this team really, really progress because my first year they weren't a playoff team. Um,
Yep.
but then to see last year them go to the Eastern Conference Finals was super, super fun to watch. Guys like Andrew Nimhard as well, improving, and Aaron Neesmith, not
Yep.
just the stars, so they have really good role players as well. But yeah, what's been even more fun, Sean, is watching these Detroit Pistons win some basketball games. We're at 30 already, Sean. 30.
31.
31 last night. I forgot about last night.
Yeah. I mean, they keep stacking up wins. They just start to blend into each other for a while. And I mean, certainly a lot to talk about there. I mean, Troy, for the first time in 10 years, the Pistons are on a 6-game winning streak. I even went and did some further digging as well. And according to, and again, this is from Grok AI, so I want to quantify that this could not entirely be, there could be some fault here. However, doing multiple searches, doing a lot of background checking myself, the Pistons went on a 5-game winning streak of 10 plus, by winning by 10 plus points in each game. That was the first time the Pistons have managed such a feat since 2006 when they went 64-18. And so, just to tell you about what this Pistons team has done, just to put into context, just the way, and it's not just the wins, it's the way in which they're winning. It's really just when you talk about, we've talked all season long just about how, the Pistons have been such a great comeback story. And, it's been well chronicled on this channel, just the struggles they went through over the last couple of years, but in particular with the 28-game losing streak last season. To go from that to having legitimate conversations about not only Cade Cunningham being all NBA, But I mean, Troy, I think we're well enough into the season. We've seen enough performances from Cade now to say he should be getting MVP talks. I'm not saying he should be he should be the favorite to an MVP. I think it's pretty clearly a two-guy race when it comes to that, but Cade Cunningham should be in top 5 MVP considerations, and he definitely should be all NBA with the way that he's playing. And that first half in particular against Atlanta was just something to behold.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Sean. And yeah, I'm glad you prefaced. We're not saying Cade Cunningham is the best player in basketball, but you think of that award, most valuable player. Who has been the most value on their basketball team? And yeah, especially you see the turnaround that the Pistons had from last season to this season, you look at Cade's stats on the offensive end with points per game, with assists, with steals, Sean, and rebounds. It's pretty fun to see, and I think I think the league has taken notice. I think him being an all-star was the league definitely recognizing these major steps that Cade is taking. But you're
Yep.
right, top 5 at the very least. I mean, there's still obviously Jason Tatum. Of course, the two-man race, you're referring to SGA and Jokic.
Yep.
Other guys as well that have really played well. But you're right. You think of most value on your team. I really can't think of many players ahead of Cade in that regard, besides the few that I just mentioned right there, which really shows that the Detroit Pistons are taking a whole different direction. Because when have we ever talked about that? I don't remember some of those names from 10, 15 years ago, Sean, ever being considered even an all-star, let alone all-NBA, let alone MVP. So Cade
Yeah.
Cunningham is the breath of fresh air that we Pistons fans have been waiting for years and years. And just, even that year 2 when he went down early for us, and to see him come back last season, and even just see what he's done this season, it's we haven't even hit the prime yet of Cade Cunningham. He still
Yeah, these are
has
still the beginning stages.
so many years to come of playing even better basketball than what we're seeing, Sean. So it's exciting time, man. I'm all for those conversations of all NBA and at least top 5 in MVP voting.
Yeah, for your team to become a contender or to, to become one of the perennial powerhouses of a conference and, in of a league, it starts with having that type of franchise altering player, right? It starts with having that type of star that can shoulder the weight of being a franchise player and could elevate the players around him. And I think that's what's truly special. We've seen a lot of guys who can come in and get their own bucket and can have, like have dynamic offensive games. But it's the fact that he's able to have the level of production for himself and for the players around him is the thing. Like Malik Beasley, is playing his best basketball in Detroit, and I don't think it's a coincidence that his best basketball is alongside of Cade Cunningham,
Mhm.
right? And just a couple other stats just to really show like the gravity of what Cade's been doing. Even just like in that game against Atlanta, per Pistons PR, uh, Cade is the third NBA player since 1997 with at least 29 points, 10 assists, and 5 rebounds by halftime. The only two other players, Troy, Luka Doncic and Bradley Beal. And obviously, one of those names is has a little bit more gravitas than the other. But I mean, Bradley Beal, remember when he was in the Wizards, his usage was insane and he had some really good games there. But another stat, Cade is the first player in NBA history to record at least 38 points, 12 assists, 7 rebounds, 3 blocks, and 7 3-pointers in a game. So when you just talk about the variety in which Cade affects the game, like we talk about, like like Cade might not be as good of an offensive player as a Luka. He might not be as good of a defensive player as, like a Chet or, like a Wemby or whatever. But like when you put together that, what makes Cade special is he's so damn good in just about every aspect of the game. And that's what's going to put him among the league's best. And now we're really just seeing, and we've talked about how, that 3-point shot is really just going to take him to another level. I think that's exactly what it's been this season.
Mhm.
He's so efficient from all 3 levels of the court. And so, yeah, it's just, we are truly seeing a special player blossom. And that just kind of leads to the question of, when you have a type of player like that, what kind of ceiling do you put on this season and what they can do? I mean, Troy, I mean, are we at a point with the way in which that they're playing that we can start having conversations of them perhaps even winning a playoff series?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And just looking at Cade's performance one last time, Sean, dominant is a word that I think of. And you talk about the variety of skills that he has. Well, he's dominating basketball games, Sean. He really is. There's games we've seen this season where he's the best player on the court. And when I see a guy on our basketball team as the best player on the court, yes, now we can transition into playoff talk. Okay, what does that mean for the playoffs? I think that winning a playoff series, a 7-game series, is absolutely possible. I think with the production we've seen on the offensive end from Malik Beasley, especially, I mean, he's going to help us win a game, right?
Yep.
I mean, his
Yep.
production on the offensive end, Jalen Duren just seems locked in. We talked about him last week of just his accountability of the steps he's been able to make throughout the season of getting better.
And
Uh,
that was before the San Antonio game, by the way, which if you just talk about like the quintessential what is the case study for what Jalen Duren can look like at the peak of his powers, you watch the San Antonio game because
yeah.
it was quite literally like watching the modern day Dwight Howard.
It was. It was. That's such a great comparison. And what's a word that we can use to describe Dwight Howard? Dominant. He was just a dominant presence down low
Yep.
during that San Antonio game on Friday night. So Sean, I think you put all of that together. You have all these puzzle pieces and you're putting together the puzzle piece. And I think at the end of the day, yeah, I think you have a first round victory. If that is against an Indiana Pacers, as you're the 5th seed, they're the 4th seed. If that is somehow, maybe you fall back into a 6th seed, but then you have a New York Knicks team who gets banged up a little bit and not their best selves. I think we could certainly exploit some of their weaknesses that we've seen from the season from them. So
Right.
yeah, I think a playoff series is at least attainable. Attainable, not putting the
Exactly.
life savings on it, but at least attainable.
The big thing is in order for this season to really put a bow on it and to be a out of the park home run success, it's to not get swept.
Yeah.
It's to go in and at least win a game.
Mhm.
And I would argue that that's what would really tell fans in the NBA stratosphere like that this is a different team because we're talking about a team that not only hasn't been in playoff conversations, but since 2008, 2009 hasn't won a playoff game. So to be taken seriously, you have to start chaining together wins on that aspect of things. If you can force the Knicks to 6 or 7 games, if you can force the Pacers to 6 or 7 games, that's an accomplishment. And if you're able to go out and upset one of those teams and to potentially play a Cleveland or Boston in a Eastern semifinals series, then that's even better. Then you're truly playing with house money. And we've talked so much before about evaluating your team and seeing where they're at. What better evaluation are you going to get, Troy, than a 7-game series against the Boston Celtics or the Cleveland Cavaliers? You're not going to. That is as good as it gets,
Yeah,
right?
it
So
is.
even against like when you look at because if it were to start today and the most likely team that the Pistons are going to play if nothing changes, if teams stay about where they're at in the standings, the most likely scenario is the New York Knicks. The Knicks are a very good team, but Troy, they're 0-7 against the Celtics, the Cavs, and the Thunder.
Yeah.
And we've seen the Pistons match up against the Knicks quite a bit this season. And I think it's, suffice to say, like the Knicks are probably the Knicks are still the favorites there, and they're probably still the better team. But that gap is not wide at all. That is a competitive matchup. And if they were to face off in a 7-game series, that's a matchup that does have some favor for Detroit.
Mhm.
So, like when you just talk about because again, when you have a type of player like Cade and you're starting to see the other pieces really start to elevate. I mean, mind you, Troy, let's just for perspective, let's remember where the conversation was 6 months ago. The conversation 6 months ago before the season started was it'd be an accomplishment if they won 25 wins this season. They're at 31 and it's not even March. So whatever preconceived notions, whatever barriers, whatever caps that we have for this team internally leading up to this season, because of what this team has done, can be completely thrown out the window. And that in itself is about as good of a compliment and as much of an achievement as this team could have probably hoped for this season. And the fact that we're having these conversations and we're talking about playing important basketball in April, in May, perhaps, the Pistons are right there. And they are poised to do exactly that.
Yeah, it's very exciting, Sean. I think you nailed a lot of those points, and it's just going to be really interesting to see, how we close out the season. We still have some definitely big games in the regular
Yep.
season to still play, and with some of those games, Sean, I think we're gonna. I think we already know what we have in house. We already
Right.
know what we've seen. We have a big enough sample size to say the least at the end of February, which we're in, but
Yep.
it's going to be those situations that are going to help prepare the Pistons moving forward to the playoffs of what how do they respond being down by 8 against the Cavs or the Celtics
Yep.
with 4 minutes to go, down by 8 with 4 minutes to go. How do both teams have their starters still on the court? How do you respond in that situation in that moment, especially if you're on the road? So there's
Yeah.
going to be scenarios like that we're still going to see before the playoffs that I think is going to
Oh,
be
yeah.
really beneficial.
I mean, Troy, just in the next couple of weeks here, we got in the next 3 weeks, the Pistons are going to be playing the Thunder twice. They're going to be playing at home against Boston. They're going to be playing at home against Denver. So, like that's the class of the NBA right there. Not to mention, you still have another matchup with the Cavaliers. You
Mhm.
still have, two more matchups with the Bucks. You still have another potential game with the. You still have a game towards the end of the season against the Knicks as well. So, even though the Pistons' strength of schedule, I believe, compared to a lot of other teams, is actually pretty favorable, you're still going to be playing some of the best teams in the league over the next couple of weeks. So if you want to talk about a real litmus test of seeing where this team is at, Oklahoma City is going to tell a lot because that is the best defensive team in basketball. And I would argue with how they're playing, it's currently not even particularly that close. So if you want to talk about, putting the Pistons through, like trial by fire, that's going to be it right there. So if they can pull off at least one win against Denver, Boston, Oklahoma City, like any of those teams, that's a massive step in the right direction. And
It
as
is.
long as they can be competitive and hold on to those games too, that's a good thing too. But I think again, we're seeing this team, beat teams they should beat. They're taking care of teams handily. They're, playing well within their identity, but that's going to be tested by the likes of the Thunder and the Celtics and the Nuggets. And I think the question that's going to be answered as the season ends is how far does this team have to go in order to be one of the best teams at the Eastern Conference? Because with the play that they've put, because of what they've done this season, they're on the doorstep of that.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right, Sean. And we want competitive basketball. And I think for me, looking at those games and looking at those matchups, that's what I want to see. But also, like you mentioned, we've seen them play competitive, right, against some of those matchups
Mhm.
already. Like we already know what they're capable of doing and staying in some of those games. But you're right, as we draw closer to the playoff picture, you just want to see that continue. And there's so many games that we can look at this season and say, "Wow, that's the type of Pistons basketball this team needs to be playing into April. That's the type
Mhm.
of performance from this player that we need to be seeing into April." So you're right; it's going to be those games that we see even more so than the Bulls, right? We talked about I think
Yep.
2 weeks ago. We both said, Sean, hey, here's an opportunity. 2 games in Chicago, our rivals, not a super good team, but still on the road. Winning on the road is tough in the league. And we saw what they did that first game, just demolished them and came
Yep.
out just as strong in the second. So, we know what they can do against those types of teams.
Right.
But
Exactly.
it's different
And
with the Denver. It's
yep.
different with the Boston. It's different with the
Yep.
Cleveland.
Yep. And this will have been their first time in about 2 months playing against Boston or Denver. The last time they played against those respective teams, they did lose by double digits. So, this will be a litmus test of if they can keep those close, if they can, if they can go down to the buzzer, which by the way, they've pretty much been doing all season long, at the very least, the Pistons have been the most entertaining watch in the league this season. I think that's pretty hard to argue on the contrary. So, again, a lot of that's gonna, it's going there's going to be a lot of different factors, but I think the big step of it all is, or the biggest point of it all is the Pistons look to be back. And the fact that they're even in those conversations is just bodes very well for the franchise. And, a lot of those teams towards the top of the conference are not going to be there in the years to come. So when you have a player like Cade, you're poised to be in those, to be towards the top of the standings for a good while.
Hmm.
Troy, a team that's not going to be up in the top of the standings for a long damn time, by the looks of things, is the Philadelphia 76ers. We do have to talk about this because on Saturday there were two games that you and I were texting back and forth about. They were obviously the Luka Doncic LA Lakers show in Denver, which we'll be definitely talking about here in a few minutes. But there was also mainly tuned in because this was Killian Hayes' first start with the Brooklyn Nets. And, obviously Killian's gotten a lot of slander and things like that. And, is a very polarizing figure within the Pistons space, but very well loved person from the organization and just someone that, I just want to see succeed. So tuned in, just wanted to see how he did there. But I couldn't even focus on Killian Hayes because of what I was seeing from Joel Embiid and from Paul George and, from the 76ers. I mean, Troy, the two best players on the Philadelphia 76ers right now are Tyrese Maxey and Kelly Oubre.
Hmm.
And if that's the case, that is a disastrous scenario for this team because you went and added Paul George, signed him 4 years, $200 million, paying him $50 million a season to essentially put up career Tobias Harris numbers when you went and replaced him because of you were disappointed of what you were getting from Tobias, which by the way, Tobias is now on a team that's doing better in Detroit that loves Tobias Harris. Like loves Tobias Harris. You need any evidence? Go look at their Twitter profile and look at when Tobias got the belt from Jalen Duren. Like this team adores Toby. I don't think the Philadelphia Sixers feel the same way about Paul George. And the biggest elephant in the room, and I don't mean that disparaging, Joel Embiid, Troy, he can't move. Like he straight up cannot move. He only moved from 3-point line to 3-point line. It was to the point where Joel Embiid got benched for the fourth quarter. And that's what ultimately allowed the 76ers to almost come back and win that game. And so now, according to Sham Charania, the 76ers are going to be reevaluating options. More than likely, Embiid's season's done, and they're going to be looking at some form of surgery or, like rehabilitation in order to, focus back on his knee. But Troy, this season's done for the 76ers. It like the only course of action for Philadelphia is to tank this season so that they can perhaps keep their pick because it's top 6 protected. If it goes 7 or below, it goes to the Oklahoma City Thunder. If it's 6 or higher, it stays with the 76ers. Of course, it's Oklahoma City,
Yeah,
right?
right.
It's
That's
always
why.
it's always Oklahoma City. They have everyone's picks. But Troy, there's just no I mean we've danced on the grave of Philly a little bit this season. But I would argue this is about as bad of a situation future wise as there is in the NBA. I think Phoenix and Philadelphia are going to tie for the worst future of any organization in the league. And the crazy thing is for both organizations and in Philly in particular in this case, the wounds are self-inflicted. He was injured this offseason and you still extended him when he wasn't even really up for extension.
Mhm. Yeah.
I mean, Troy, that is we're Daryl Morey's going to lose his job because of that extension. The fact that there's legitimately an argument for the worst contract in the league with Bradley Beal, who has a no trade clause, and those both of those players who have that argument are on the Philadelphia 76ers. If both of those contracts were signed this summer, we I mean it was the offseason that was praised by everybody. But it turns out that offseason could have killed the Philadelphia 76ers hopes of being competitive for potentially up to a decade.
Yeah, it's right. The interesting part, when we talk about teams making poor decisions, is there's always an exit door, or there's always a way out of, okay, you have to trade this player. Okay, you have to let this player walk in free agency. Okay, you have to make sure you don't, extend this player. But with the Philadelphia 76ers, you're right. They're in a position where there's no way of looking at big picture with this until you give it another 2, 3, 4 years, right? I mean, you just have to watch this scenario crash and burn. And that's hard to say when we're already watching it, but you have to watch it make a bigger crash and a bigger burn. But what we saw with Joel Embiid, the little bit we saw him with Olympic stuff this summer, I'm not going to say you called it, Sean, from a mile away, but you did. I mean, there were some genuine concerns of him in the summer with the Olympics and what we saw out of him there. So you're right. Extending a player when they're not up for extension, I guess I never really fathomed that part of this, but you're right. He did. That was what the move was this offseason. And that's, when we look at a guy like Embiid, he did have some flashes last year of really good performances, but keyword flashes. We didn't really see that at all
Mhm.
for a large sample this season or last season. And again, has
Not
he
at all this season.
right, right. Not at all this season, but a little bit last season, but not even much more than a little bit last season. But with
Yep.
that, Sean, what's his career most games in the regular season? Is it even 60? Is it 55?
Yeah, let me pull that up real quick. But I mean, he's missed about 50% of his games. The
Ever.
most so Joel Embiid, he's played 60 plus games, 4 seasons in his career. The
Okay.
problem is they each of those seasons, and even the seasons where he's played less, no matter what, he's always injured in some capacity come April, May, and June.
Which is when
So
you need him
I
the most. Yeah.
exactly. I always thought the premise of just coasting him by until April, May, and June, it was always a faulty premise. And that's why it's so hard to build around players like a Joel Embiid, because when you're really just because one of the things in regular season, you have to build momentum towards the playoffs. You have to build chemistry. You have to people say the regular season doesn't matter, but the truth of the matter is that's where you do your preparation for the playoffs. And for an Embiid, like I always thought that was a faulty premise, but then now this season it's just straight up, oh well, he can't even be a productive player on the court. And we're talking about Troy, this is a guy who was in defensive player of the year considerations for multiple points in his career. One of the touted as one of the best defensive players in the league. He was a literal cone in that game against the Nets. Like the entire strategy from Brooklyn was to attack and exploit Joel Embiid in the paint. And it worked to a shocking degree.
Yeah.
And so now we're talking about a guy who is over the hill of 30, more than likely is about to have another knee surgery. And oh, by the way, in his final year of his contract, you're going to be paying him excess of $60 million. dollars.
Well, Sean, we talk about a guy that, blew everyone's mind 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, getting traded, Luka Doncic, right? And
Yep.
our big thing was, if Luka can get traded, anyone can get traded. But guess what with Joel Embiid? He has no trade value. Like what teams this offseason are going to be begging the Sixers to make a deal for Joel Embiid? There is none. There's not
Well,
even remotely. Go ahead.
and I'm just real quick, Troy. I'm glad you brought that up because there's a tweet that went viral over the weekend that really just resonates with this conversation, and it just sums up the absurdity of that trade and of just where the league is at. The Dallas Mavericks really gave up on Luka Doncic before the 76ers gave up on Joel Embiid. Like we are really in a universe where the Dallas Mavericks had that brief stint of Luka's injuries and said, "Nope." Whereas Philly, they've just rode this out. And
Dallas
so now
at age 25, Luka took Dallas to the finals when Joel Embiid is 31 and he's never got past the second round. Tyrese Halliburton has gotten past the second round.
mhm. Mhm. And by the way, all those years, it was always someone else's fault. It was it was the coach. It was Ben Simmons. It was Tobias Harris. It was all these other things. It was never the fault of Joel Embiid. But now this is this is this is, so to speak, the roost, like the chicken's coming home to roost. This is the bill is due. It is time. The collection time is now, and the cards are declining. The accounts are empty. Recollections coming on Monday to take everything out of the house. They're things are going to have to be stripped barren before this team can start heading in another direction. And I mean, Troy, things are so bad they might have to legit consider trading Tyrese Maxey to get assets and to propel and really speed up whatever rebuilding process they're going to have. Which I mean, they better hope it doesn't get to that case because Tyrese Maxey really is the saving grace of the 76ers. But now, like you're really gonna you're gonna have to really focus it on his happiness
Right, right.
because you gotta imagine he's probably pretty frustrated with how everything's been handled over the last couple of years. And if Philly wants to actually start moving in any sort of positive direction, they need to put Joel Embiid way down on the pecking order of priorities and really start focusing on guys who can actively produce for them night in, night out. I mean, this is just this to me, this just feels like the death of Joel Embiid as an all-star caliber player in this league. There's no way he gets back to that level.
Right, right. And, going back to, Tyrese Maxey and moving forward, he's a darn good NBA player, Sean. I mean, he is a guy that you're right. You do want to listen to, you do want to keep in house because my goodness, you have absolutely no way out. And yeah, you look at watching this thing crash and burn more, like I brought up a few minutes ago. The only reason why it might not be a bigger crash or a bigger burn is because you got lucky with a guy late in the first round, mind you, drafting of Tyrese Maxey. And
Yep.
I think him at the center moving forward. But also, you're right. Like you have no idea what leaps he's going to take, and of course, him wanting to potentially leave in the next 2-3 years. You just have no idea. You can't make predictions this early on in his career. But I
Nope.
tell you, you can't tell me he doesn't have red flags already with how he's watched this organization structure their roster.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, now you're going to be everything from the top down is going to be reevaluated for this organization. We could be talking about a not only an executive search, we could be talking about a coaching search. We could be talking about like a rebuild. We could be talking about, like there's legit reasons to believe they could try and shop Paul George this offseason.
Hmm.
And we could be having the talks of where Paul George's next destination might be. And the fact that that's even already being potentially floated out there is insane. Paul George, I don't know if, some of it could be just the not being in a good situation. I don't it doesn't feel great necessarily just saying Paul George is just definitively washed now. I mean, he is still 34, so it's not like it's not necessarily like in the modern NBA, he's just this super old veteran. We're seeing guys who are older still put up big numbers. But the weight and the everything surrounding Philadelphia has just seemed to be a terrible situation for Paul George. I don't know if he has this type of year if he's with the Clippers. I don't know if he's still playing really well if he's in LA, but I mean, Troy, he just there's no other way to say it. I mean, Paul George, like he wasn't a threat in that game either. I don't know if there's something health wise wrong with him, but he's just not the same guy.
Right, right. No, he's not, Sean. And there were spells, especially that that 2021 playoff series in the Western Conference Finals against the Phoenix Suns. Of course, they lost to the Phoenix Suns, but we got some good production from him in the Clippers uniform too, right? I mean, it wasn't
Yep.
just Pacers and Thunder Paul George that we saw, his prime. He put up some good years as a Los Angeles Clipper as well. And yeah, I don't know. He just doesn't seem like his passion is in the game this season. Like he was a dynamic scorer in his prime, and again, his prime still including bits and pieces of that Clippers stretch that he was in, and he just doesn't seem locked in. Like he wants to go out and play competitive basketball each and every night. And when you take nights off like that, you're gonna get exposed in this league.
Yeah.
I don't care who you are. And I just feel like his head and I would imagine his heart just isn't in playing for an organization like this. I don't really have anything other than that to report, Sean.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about the way that things ended with the Clippers and him coming to Philadelphia because of the fact that that was the team that would give him that extra year, that would give him that full max contract. There you would maybe think if they were playing more competitive basketball, you would see a more motivated Paul George, perhaps, sitting him for the rest of the season as well and allowing him to get back healthy would be a good thing for him too. Maybe that reset allows him to come back and be better, whether that's in a Philly uniform, whether that's somewhere else. I mean, I will say, like, I don't think with the way that he's playing, listen, I'll just say Detroit with all the players they're going to have to pay and things coming up salary wise. I don't think a Paul George necessarily makes a ton of sense
Yeah,
in a Detroit Pistons uniform next season. But I will say, if there's a window to go get a Paul George type player and buy low with the potential of what he could do, I'm just saying
yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if that's something that's floated around this summer.
Sure, sure, sure. Yeah, I
So,
guess I never really thought about that because we never really traditionally have been in the market during free agency to land a guy like that. Even an aging star, I guess you could
yeah.
say the only year we did that in free agency was Tracy McGrady. Remember that? But
Yep.
that was even he was even in more washed up shape than Paul George
Yeah,
was.
the last big fish, so to speak, the Pistons got in the free agency market was Josh Smith.
Oh
We
my
all know how that went.
gosh!
Before that, it was Ben Gordon and Charlie Villanueva. So
Oh,
historically speaking, Detroit hasn't really done a whole lot of work in free agency, but with the way that they're playing, there's a lot of reason to believe that this team could go out and really, make a trade to really propel this roster going forward. And I'm not saying that this is what Detroit's going to do, but
mhm.
I would just say I wouldn't be surprised if that's someone that Detroit floated around. Again, talking about being happy, going from Philly to Detroit, it's not like he'd be getting in a warmer city by any means there, but again, when you have the opportunity to add someone who could play to that level, I don't even know if I necessarily like the idea. I'm just processing of the fact that that's even a conversation about Paul George after he signed that contract, after all the conversations about Philly and what they were supposed to be, what this team, what was meant to be going into the season is just it's really an indictment on the 76ers. My last 76ers question, this is a quick one, Troy. Should Nick Nurse be the coach next year? Because if there's anything I feel when I watch this team as well, is that there's not great cohesion from not only from the front office down, but I don't necessarily see a team that is necessarily enthused to play for Nick Nurse. And here's what I'll say. It seems like a lot of players get sick of playing for a Nick Nurse pretty quickly. And if you're to take out that Kawhi year with the Toronto Raptors, the Nick Nurse resume suddenly doesn't look as sweet. Do you? I personally, not to show my hand here, but I think the 76ers should heavily consider getting a younger coach that can help and do whatever youth movement this team would be looking to do, because I don't necessarily think, I don't know if Nick Nurse is hurting and is the reason why Philly's doing what they're doing, but I damn sure don't think Nick Nurse is helping.
Yeah, yeah. No, I guess I didn't really think of that question, Sean, but certainly whatever decision you make this offseason, you you need someone with patience, but you also need someone with clear direction.
Yep.
And I'm not 100% sure you get that right away with the Nick Nurse,
Yep.
but yeah, I'll probably have to think about that a little more, Sean. But again, at least I know that you need a guy who has vision and direction, but they have to have patience as well, because what they're working with, you're not going to win it. I will predict no 2026 Philadelphia 76ers championship. So
Yeah, Troy, I appreciate the boldness there, but I mean, thus far, Nick Nurse he's 67 and 71 in a 76ers as the
yeah,
76ers head coach. That loss column is only going to get bigger as the season goes on, and it just doesn't necessarily seem to me like he has a real hold of that locker room.
right, right. And for that, you might want to move on and bring someone in that has better vision. And
Right.
yeah.
And the other reality too is when you talk about making an executive change, eventually they're going to want to have their own coach anyway.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Right, right. So that says it all. Maybe that's a question where you know the answer is given for you, right? Of
Yep.
you get a new executive. Well, you don't have to worry about a coach because you're getting a new one.
Yep. The Philadelphia 76ers have not won a game since 5 days before the Eagles won the Super Bowl.
Wow.
So, when you talk about where things are at, that's what's facing the Philadelphia 76ers currently. They haven't even won since 5 days before the Super Bowl. And Josh Harris ain't distracted with the Commanders anymore. Season's well over. So, I imagine his full attention is back on the mess in Philly, and I wouldn't be shocked if before the season ended, we got it, or right when the season ends, we get some form of Shams bomb saying that Daryl Morey's been relieved of his duties, because there's no tenable future for him there with what's happened this season.
Right, right. They've
Now,
been in win now mode for how many years?
yep, and they're only heading in the wrong direction. Now, Troy, a team that's not heading in the wrong direction. In fact, I think we just got a real glimpse of how special they can be over the weekend, is the Los Angeles Lakers, and specifically the Luka Doncic LeBron James pairing. Now, I'm pretty sure ever since the Luka Doncic trade happened, we've made it pretty apparent on this podcast that we think it's pretty laughable to believe that LeBron and Luka couldn't work on the offensive end together. And I think, Troy, this was the case study of why these two are an elite pairing. When you talk about, I mean, LeBron said after the game, Luka's a great quarterback. I'm a great wide receiver, and his ability to run the court, Luka's ability to pass, and his vision. This was the first game where Luka was the focal point of their offense, where he was the one that was running everything. And it resulted in a 32-point performance that was about as good as we've seen Luka Doncic play this season. And it was the 4 steals and a block on the defensive end, his 7 assists and 10 rebounds, the intensity that he was playing with and the focus and determination that he came with in that game, and to do it all against a Denver team that has had the Lakers number, and to do it in that such of a dominant fashion was really impressive. And I think the biggest catalyst, obviously, a Luka Doncic. He played some pretty great basketball and is starting to look more like Luka Doncic. But Troy, I think it's time we give JJ Redick his flowers. I think he's legitimately been a top 5 NBA coach this season. And to say that about a rookie head coach who's coming to the Los Angeles Lakers, coaching LeBron James, and now has to coach Luka Doncic on top of that. That is a difficult challenge for anybody. But for someone who was called who was thought of as just a podcaster not even a year ago, Troy, what he did against that Denver team schematically, he literally didn't sleep until like between his last game and that Denver game, putting together a scheme for Nikola Jokic. And that was about as good of a coaching performance as I've seen from a coach all season long.
Yeah, yeah, Sean, it worked. You looked at, well, just looking at the two, that's what you started on, so I'm going to start there too. Looking
Of
at
course.
LeBron James and Luka Doncic as teammates, these are two guys that are known for their high IQ, right? These are guys who know the game of basketball, who are able to see things on the court their whole careers that no one else sees, and somehow make it work, and being able to score the ball and dishing it to one another. And I think that's a special pairing. And I have no doubts that this is going to be a pairing that is going to result in some wins this season. Now, with looking at Reddick, really from the start, Sean, he didn't seem like most rookie coaches. They seem to have a transition period where they're really getting a feel for everything. Maybe there's a big losing streak or whatever. Maybe sometimes, unfortunately, rookie coaches sometimes lose the locker room midway season. But we haven't really seen any of this at all from JJ Redick. Instead, the Lakers looked pretty good on opening night, if you remember. And
Yep.
as they move throughout the year, sure, just like anyone would have with Anthony Davis on the roster earlier in the year, you're going to struggle with injuries and things like that. But it just seems like he was able to figure out quick defensive schemes, but also how to score in the league as well. And
Yep.
I think his roster helped him. Having vets on that team helped him. But it just seems like he's built for this game. And this
Yeah.
summer, Sean, how many podcasts did we talk about? Will he lose the locker room? Will he lose the locker room? Is he just a podcast, like you mentioned
Yeah. How
earlier?
does he handle the dynamics of a team?
But not just any team, the Lakers
Yep.
organization. Not this isn't Sacramento or Milwaukee. This is
Yep.
the Lakers. And he looks like a pro in his rookie coaching season. And that's so
Yeah.
exciting to see because he's a guy that I've always loved. I loved him as a player. I loved him, in broadcasting, listen to some of his podcasts, and to see him do this well. Uh, it's fun to watch, Sean. So yeah,
Yeah.
I see them making a run in the playoffs. And I wouldn't have said this a month ago with looking at Anthony Davis's health. And even as good
Absolutely
of a
not.
coaching job that Redick has done, I still didn't think this team was constructed for playoff basketball, at least at making a push for a conference finals. But
Yep.
but now with Luka, with getting everything working, Sean, are we part-time Lakers fans?
I mean, I texted you over the weekend
Yeah.
saying I can't believe I'm in a position where I am actively rooting for the Lakers to succeed. But when you talk about the formula of, a Luka Doncic who is one of the most electric players in the league, who just got screwed over in historical fashion, just had his dirty laundry aired in front of the national basketball audience, to see him alongside a 40-year-old LeBron James who looks still about 90% as good as his Miami days,
Mhm.
which the fact that he still is doing that at 40 years old, one of the greatest players to ever play the game, you see him team up with a Luka Doncic and all that with, a JJ Redick rookie head coach who, had a lot of doubters and a lot of people looking at, past him. The Lakers have been nothing but remarkable this season, and this is coming from a podcast that historically has been very happy to clown on the Lakers. And so I've always said it's important to give people due when they deserve their due. And that includes what I can't believe I'm saying this, but that includes Rob Pelinka, the job that he's done of identifying JJ and identifying pieces alongside LeBron and Luca, and for them to be this competitive right now is remarkable. And again, I don't think this is a team that's gonna represent the Western Conference. I don't know if this is a team that, that even, makes the Western Conference finals, but to put a limit on a LeBron James, Luka Doncic led roster, to me, is about as dumb of a decision as you can make.
Yeah, you're right, Sean. Wow.
So, and it's not just JJ Redick either, by the way. I think it's important to acknowledge the incredible coaching staff that they have, to have Nate McMillan and Scotty Brooks right next to, a rookie head coach, to have that much experience on your bench. Like, those are guys who were very good head coaches in their own right. To be there with JJ, I think that's been a big factor of his success, is having the right staff with him. And just I again, you can't really put a ceiling on what this team can do and what they can be. And the thing that's exciting to consider and to think about is, what does this team look like next season when
Mm,
LeBron and Luca have more experience together? When they actually have an off season to build around Luka Doncic into, not just from a roster construction standpoint, but this is just off of JJ and his staff having Luka for a couple weeks. Can you imagine when they have him for about a year?
yeah.
When they can work with him, throughout an entire summer and tailor their offense around him,
Mhm.
that's the thing that's exciting. So,
It is, and Luca, for his short career that we've seen, is a coachable guy. I mean, we
yes,
know he has that competitive nature where he wants to go out there and win. LeBron James, we know historically it takes the right coach to coach him, but it just seems like JJ's got it together with these two. And you're right, having a full summer, but also off-season moves. What
right.
what moves can you do to bring in players that can play around these guys, and especially, I mean, you're building around Luca at this point,
Yep.
with LeBron James's age, as well as he's playing, you're still building around Luca here, and
And
it's gonna be fun to watch, Sean. But I also think, Sean, I do see this team going to a Western Conference Finals. Now, it's not going to be an official prediction of mine, but I do see a world where this team um, can match up with an Oklahoma
oh,
City.
absolutely.
And could you imagine that Western Conference Finals of SGA versus Luca?
And it would be otherworldly. And I mean, just like like you said, it's like you cannot rule out that possibility. And I would also be remiss if we didn't mention the other factor to this team's ceiling, and that is Austin Reeves.
Yeah,
And he has been amazing for this Lakers team this
he
season,
knows
and
his
in
role.
particular over the last couple of weeks. I mean, Troy, a couple of weeks ago against Indiana, he had 45 points.
Yeah, it
He
was
had
a good
he had
game.
thir he had 32 in Portland the other night. In this Denver game, he had 23. He is showing the legitimate chops to be a really damn good offensive player. To me, I see a lot of Tyler Hero in some of the way that he plays and the way that he attacks,
Mhm.
the game. And when you have that type of player alongside a Luka Doncic, and they're about the same age, like Austin Reeves is 26 years old, Luka Doncic is 25. Like, your core for the Lakers for the next decade is Luka Doncic and Austin Reeves.
Mhm.
That is about as good of a 1-2 combo core to have in this league.
It's a combo that can score the basketball, and it's a combo
Yep.
that can play competitive each and every night because of their ability to score the basketball. And
Yep. And
in
and
today's modern NBA, Sean, that's how you win.
yep. Yep. And put a rim runner around him, put some defensive specialists who can space the floor around those guys. That's a championship formula.
Yeah, yeah,
Especially with good coaching.
right.
Especially, when Luka's at his best, which I think he's gonna be at his best going forward.
Is there a guy this summer, Sean, that you would love to see from a fan perspective, be in a Los Angeles Laker uniform?
I mean, from a fan perspective, I still don't I don't know if I'm putting myself in that wheelhouse yet, but I will say, one player who reportedly is going who as of it was actually floated out earlier today, one player who's reportedly going to be opting out this summer and going to be kind of dipping his toe into the free agency market is Naz Reid.
Hmm,
And I think he would be a great fit in a Pistons uniform. I think he'd be an amazing fit in a Lakers uniform. I think Naz Reid is one of those players that fits on all 30 teams in the league. They would all borderline stumble over themselves to get a guy like that. Is there potentially a better big to put alongside of Luka in a pick and roll than a Naz Reid, who's really good defensively, can catch lobs, defends really hard, but also and stretch the floor and shoot the three?
right, I was gonna say that. For me, when I think of Naz Reid, as he can destroy a defensive scheme by his ability to stretch the ball.
And that's the thing with Luka. He's great with the lob threat, but like you put him in the pick and roll and you have that type of versatile option where you literally have to you have to honor and not you cannot like keep an eye off of Nas Reed. So I to me that's something that immediately makes sense. I also, quite frankly, would not be surprised if the Lakers made another run at Jalen Duren this offseason because them opting out on Mark Williams, something tells me Jalen Duren's the big they really wanted.
Mhm, mhm.
And I wouldn't be
Let's
shocked if
keep
they
him
went
in
and made that.
Detroit, though. Let's keep him in Detroit.
Oh, no, I agree with you, and I think there's a reason why Trajan Langdon said no. I think he would have to be truly wowed by an offer, by an offer to go and actually make that type of move. Quite frankly, I think he'd want to somehow try to get like an Austin Reeves in that type of deal
Sure,
because of,
sure.
kind of like a ceiling of what Jalen Duren has. So it's gonna be fascinating. Real quick, Troy, one last team I want to talk about before we wrap up uh, is the New York Knicks. Specifically, they are now. I mentioned it earlier in the podcast. They are now 0-7 against the Cleveland Cavaliers, Boston Celtics, and Oklahoma City Thunder, and they have lost all of these games by considerable margin. Not only are they losing these games, but they are losing them while still playing their starters heavy minutes. The most notable player, Karl Anthony Towns, who is who was clearly injured, came out in the fourth quarter with an apparent knee injury, and they were still down by almost 20. He puts Karl Anthony Towns back in for the final minutes of the game. And now the Knicks are, they're really in this kind of like roster wise, they have compiled this very competitive roster. They have Jalen Brunson, they have Karl Anthony Towns, they have Josh Hart, Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby. If this team does not achieve what we think they can achieve, which Troy, I don't think there's anybody that doesn't think that this Knicks team should be a contender. We might have to like the league as a whole and the Knicks in particular might start having some real uncomfortable conversations about Tom Thibodeau and what they might need to do at the coaching spot, which is crazy to say because Tom Thibodeau is a big reason why the Knicks are as good as they have been. He built that culture there, but Troy, this is no longer we're talking about a Tom Thibodeau team that's 21st in defense. They're playing all of their starters 40 plus minutes. Will they even be in condition to compete come playoff time. And this year, quite frankly, they've never looked close to the upper echelon. The reason why we can talk about the Pistons having a legit chance to win a first round playoff series is because this Knicks team is not an overwhelming force that we thought they could be when they put this together. Like when you watch the Knicks, is it me or does it just feel like something's missing?
No, I think that is a fair assessment here because the rosters the roster's really good, Sean, the Knicks, but it's not quite Boston or even Cleveland constructed, and I think that goes without even being said.
Mhm.
If I'm a Knicks fan and I look at that, yeah, I think a piece is missing. Now, you went to a 7-game series against Indiana when you really should have won that series to be pushed into the Eastern Conference Finals, and should have probably matched up against the Boston Celtics there. But the injuries, the fatigue from a Tibbs last year, I just and to see them play such heavy minutes again this year, this team I think is going to be a lot more beaten up by May than I think we're ready to admit. You're right.
They're already looking really beaten up.
Yeah, yeah. Now, Hartenstein was a good defensive guy on the roster last year, but of course, through the trades and getting rid of DiVincenzo to get Cat, you thought that was the big splash that would put them even in more contention for Eastern Conference Finals and maybe even an NBA Finals. But as good as Cat has seen at times, he isn't that splash or that piece that I think the New York Knicks were hoping for. Now, again, he still has played some really good basketball, Sean.
I think Cat's played the best basketball of his career. I think, quite frankly, like if I'm to pinpoint what are the players that are really not living up to what they traded for, it's
Bridges,
O-
yeah,
it's OG Anunoby and Bridges.
right.
Like offensively, those guys have been solid in Knicks uniforms. But the fact that we're not we're talking about a 21st ranked defense in the league with OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges as your wings,
Something's missing there.
that is an inconceivable thought in my mind. Part of it is you are inherently giving up some rim protection when Karl Anthony Towns is your number one big. That is a thing. We have seen that
Yeah,
for throughout years.
and I think I was getting at that a little more, but go
Right.
ahead.
No, I'm sorry, Troy. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, 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 no. I was going to say on the defensive end, I don't think Cat was all that you wanted. Even though, yeah, he's playing some good basketball on the offensive end. Now,
Right.
I would say last year with the Timberwolves, I guess the little bit I watched the Knicks this year, I would have thought he had some better stretches last year going into the playoffs than what I've seen at least with him in a Knicks uniform this year. But you're right on that wing. Bridges, especially more than Anunoby I've seen, has been a disappointment because it's not just. I think there's been flashes of good defense by Bridges, but to me, Bridges was a lot better scorer in years prior.
And this was supposed to be a grand slam. Like this
Mhm.
was supposed to be the reason why the Knicks went out and gave up as much as they did for a Mikal Bridges is because of all the different things that he brings to the table. And if you're just to look at his at his box score from just from his offensive game, like on paper, it looks fine. Like it's about it's about what you would hope and expect to get from Mikal Bridges on the offensive end of the court, but the whole premise of this team, the entire philosophy behind the construction of this team and what they were built to be was a team that could beat the Boston Celtics, a
Right.
team that could
Yeah.
match up and the reason why was because you have Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby to shut down to Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. Like the wing matchup, that is about as good as you are going to get. And the fact that the Knicks have never even looked like they belong on the same court is a massive problem. And unfortunately for the Knicks, the easiest fix to this are the easiest solution to reach out to because they've really exhausted a lot of their assets. Like they've used their picks, they've used their cap space. The easiest adjustment to make next is at the head coaching position. And yeah, you're the Knicks, so you're gonna have if you go out and make and hire a coach, like especially with how good they've been, I think they're gonna be one of the more desirable landing spots for a coach in the NBA. But I don't even necessarily know if that fixes things. So we just talked about the Lakers and a head coaching change there has made a world of a difference. JJ Redick has been awesome as the head coach of the Los Angeles Lakers, but that doesn't grow on trees. That's not every coaching hire. And quite frankly, Tom Thibodeau is already one of the, like we talk a lot about he is a very flawed coach. Well, every coach has flaws. But Tibbs, like, he won Coach of the Year a couple of years ago for a reason. He's about as good as it gets as far as NBA coaches goes. So to me, it's like it's when we look at what the Knicks are going to do going forward. Like this was a team that we were singing its praises and things were looking super bright. But it's just been even though there have been some awesome moments and Cat's been amazing in a Knicks uniform. This has not been, I think, the season that Knicks fans have been hoping for. Really, it's going to come down to what they do come playoff time. But I mean, Troy, if I'm the Pistons, I don't necessarily feel threatened if I'm facing the New York Knicks on playoff time.
Right, and I would think JB Bickerstaff would be able to, I trust his coaching, expose some of those weaknesses that we talked about on the defensive end because we have some offensive weapons, as we talked about earlier, and as we'll continue to talk about. And I think those offensive weapons, again, I use the word expose, can expose some of those lack of defense that we see on the wing.
Yeah, and even and especially like in the interior too. Like if Karl Anthony Towns is going to continue to be like their number one rim protector, like yeah, they'll have Mitchell Robinson supposedly, but by then like he's inching his way closer to a return. But at the same time, he's also like he's still dealing with, he's still dealing with the health issues, and he's still someone that very easily gets into foul trouble. So when we talk about like come playoff time, like a guy like a Jalen Duren, he could exploit that very easily. So it's that's just when you talk about like teams that are that are going to have a very important next month or so. The Knicks are very much in that conversation because I think as they continue to lose these games against the top class of the league, the pressure just is going to only ramp up for them.
You're right,
But
and we're gonna catch more talk about that, Sean. You're gonna catch it right here from half court, right?
absolutely, we're going to be talking about all of these stories and all of these developing topics as they come up. Troy, appreciate you being here. This was a really fun episode, and thank you to the listeners at home. Be sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any content here. Thank you so much for listening. We'll catch you guys next time from half court. Be sure you're subscribed.